So you said they had you in the
Yes,
cattle
that's
car.
the cattle cars. So we were in those cattle cars for 3.5 days.
Wow.
You know those completely enclosed cattle
Yeah.
cars?
Yeah.
We had about maybe 80 or 100 people in a cattle car.
Wow.
We were so tightly packed, I couldn't move my shoulder left or right.
And it was
Bend
women,
down.
children.
Children, women, old people, sick people. For 3.5 days we didn't have water, no food, and we couldn't go to the bathroom. No sanitary conditions. It was summertime, June.
Wow.
It was very hot.
Did
Some
you,
people committed suicide in the cattle car.
Wow. So did you know where you were going?
No,
Did
we
you
had no
think-
idea where we're going.
So they just loaded you into the
No,
train. Right.
And after
Did they
three
tell
and-
you anything?
Nothing.
Wow.
So after 3.5 days, the train stops. We don't know where we are.
Wow.
They open the gates, we stumble out. They remove the dead people. 3 or 4 people died on the way.
And were these German officers?
Germans, yes,
Okay.
yes. And we didn't know where we are.
Yeah.
We got out from the cattle cars. SS soldiers were waiting for us.
Right.
They were driven down the road about a quarter of a mile to a concentration camp.
Right.
I didn't know what a concentration camp was.
Right.
I never even heard the word concentration camp.
Right.
I see barbed wires, wooden barracks, guard tower.
Right.
When we got into the camp, all the wooden barracks were already filled up with people. We camped outdoors on an open field.
Right.
It was 1944, summer, about a year before the war ended. Germany needed a lot of slave labor because all the German men were in the army.
Right.
They needed slave laborers in the factories, on the farms,
Right.
in the cities to clear the rubble because during the day American bombers came, at
Right.
night the British,
Right.
so they needed a lot of slave labor.
Right.
And slave labor was cheap,
Right.
right?
Yeah.
So
What factory do you remember? What did you do?
German trucks came into the campground requisiting slave labor.
Right.
A small truck with 2 civilians pulls up front of our line. Now you have to imagine this: thousands of people standing on an open field after the ghetto and the 3.5 days of trade. And we look terrible, hungry,
Right.
thirsty.
Right.
A small truck with 2 civilians pulls up. There's an SS officer standing in front of our line.
Right.
And he calls out, he said, who's a mechanic here? Well, I was a pre-engineering student at the time in high school.
Okay.
So I figured if they want a mechanic, maybe they don't want to kill me, right?
Right. Right.
So I put my hands up. I says, I am a mechanic. He looked at me. I looked very young. He says, you are a mechanic? I said, yes, I'm a mechanic. He says, come, go on the truck. I was very naive. I said to the officer, I said, I cannot go. I have my mother and sister here with me. You see, before they took my father away, because he wasn't with us, he was taken away in those labor service.
Right.
Before they took him away, he called me aside and he says, now Steve, you are the man in the family. Take care of your mother and sister. So I wouldn't want to live without them.
Right.
But I was very naive. He couldn't argue with an SS officer.
Right.
Life was very cheap. So he says to me again, he says, go on the truck. I didn't say anything, but I didn't move. he had a pistol in a holster on his left side. And he puts his hand on the holster. And he says to me again, "Go on the truck." I didn't say a word, but I didn't move. Well, I can tell you that was my lucky day, because one of the civilians who came on the truck stepped up to the officer. He said something into his ears, and the officer looked at me and he said, "Where is your mother and sister?" So I pointed them out. He says, "Bring them along and go on the truck."
Wow.
They chose another 18 or so people, and they took us to a factory in Vienna.
Okay.
Behind the factory, they built a wooden barracks with barbed wires all around.
Right.
They put us in there, and we started to work as slave laborers in Nazi Germany. Well, we worked 7 days a week, from 7 in the morning to 7 at night. Sunday, when the factory didn't work, we had to do the cleanup. And food was very little. Our daily ration was a small piece of bread.
Right.
It was so hard I had to soak it in water before I could eat it. One potato,
Right.
and a small piece of margarine, artificial margarine. That was our daily ration. So we were always hungry. And actually food was very important,
Right.
because food meant life.
And that was maybe their way of compensating you, you think?
Yeah.
Food?
Well, it wasn't enough.
Right.
Wasn't enough.
Right. Yeah. Wow. And how long were you at the factory?
We were from June 1944 till April 1945. So approximately a year.
And what kind of work did you do in the factory?
Well, they put me in the machine shop.
Okay.
The rest of the group worked in the factory, doing regular factory work, production work, things like that.
And was this military kind of machinery? Or was this...
Well, no. Well, during the war, every factory
Right.
in Germany had to do some military work.
Right.
But they were also, originally that factory was doing, in peacetime, they were making milk cans
Okay.
for farmers, those huge
Right.
20-gallon milk cans. And that's what they doing during the war too, beside the armament.
Right. Wow. So, when you were in the factory, did you ever feel like it wasn't going to end, or you'd be there for a long time?
Well, we figured we'll be there a long time. We didn't
Right.
know when the war will end.
Right. You felt like
Yes.
it could keep going.
Right.
Right. And how did the officers treat you? Did they?
Well, in the
Was it-
factory, we had a very good. You see, the civilians working in the factory
Right.
were very good people, mostly old people.
Did you get to know each other? Did you make friends with any of the people that were there? That you worked with?
Not friends, but we were
right.
talking.
Talking.
But you see, every factory had a Nazi overseer.
Right. Okay.
And so he was watching what we are doing, that nobody gives us anything, that we're not slowing down working,
Right.
things like that. So they tried to make our life more miserable. But the regular workers were not bad, because they were old people.
Right. Right.
Old people, like 55, 65, 70 years old people.
Wow.
And before the war, Austria was a socialist country, so they were not
Right.
not very hospitable to the Nazi ideas.
And what did they do with the really young children? Were they working in the factories too?
Yes, my sister was working in a factory too. She was 12 years old.
Wow, 12. Wow. Now, when the war ended and the German party surrendered, how did you leave the factory?
Well, like April 1945, we started to hear big guns in the distance.
Right.
We knew that the Russians were coming closer to Vienna. And the fighting came closer and closer until they were already on the streets of Vienna.
Wow.
Street to street fighting. And one day we were ready to go to work in the factory, but everybody disappeared. Nobody came to work in the factory. Our camp commander disappeared.
Wow.
And so we knew that the Russians must be very close by.
Right.
So we left the factory.
You just walked out?
Just
Gates
walked
were
out.
open?
Walked out, yes. Walked out. Because we knew that the SS were going from every place where Jews were working, and they were killing as many as they could.
Right, so you were worried they would come back.
To get us.
Right.
There was a bigger camp of Hungarian Jews, about 450 people in the city center of Vienna.
Oh, wow.
And just one night before the liberation, the SS came, they surrounded the camp, and they machine gunned everybody in the camp and burned the camp down. So we knew we had to get out, because if the SS comes, we were finished.
Wow. And how far did you walk? Where did you walk to?
Well, we hid out in an apartment building. There was an apartment building next to the factory. And I told my mother, let's get out of here before the SS comes. And I said, let's go down to that apartment building. They have a basement. The tenant used it as an air raid shelter also. And I said, maybe we can hide out there. My mother says, yes, but they know who we are. Maybe they give us away. Well, I said, maybe they do, maybe not.
Right.
They have to take a chance.
Right.
If we stay here, we should be dead. If we go there, maybe we have a chance to survive.
Right.
So we went down to that basement. Of course, the fighting was going on already on the streets of Vienna. And we go down to this basement, and the tenants already from the apartment building sitting along the wall on benches. We go in. Of course, they looked at us, that they knew who we are. And you know, apartment buildings have little cubicles where tenants store things.
Right.
So I said to my mother and sister, go into one of those cubicles. I laid them down on the floor. And I went around in the building looking for old lumber, old furniture, whatever I could find, and I covered them completely until you couldn't see anybody laying on the floor. Of course, nobody could cover me, right? So I went and I sat down with the tenants on the bench, waiting for the liberation. Sure enough, banging on the door, the basement door, SS calls in. He said, are there any German army deserters and Jews here? And one of the tenants kept my finger crossed what they would say. And one of the tenants calls out, he said, no, nobody like this here. And I was waiting for the SS to come in to check for documents, because they always check for documents. But nothing happens. Big fight up on the street. Explosion, machine gun. I waited maybe about an hour until all the fighting faded away. I went upstairs, I pushed the basement door open, and right in front of the door, a dead SS.
Wow.
And up on the street, sitting on top of a tank, a Russian soldier. I said, my God, we are liberated, we are free. I waved to him, he waved me back.
Oh, wow. That must have felt great.
Yes. I said, pure luck, pure luck. I see what happened. The SS didn't have time to come in the basement to check because the Russians shot him.
Wow. You were a hero, you know.
I'm not a hero. I was
16
lucky.
Years old.
Lucky.
All this you went through.
I was lucky. That's all it was, luck. Nothing else. It's not what I did or I didn't do. It was just pure luck. Everything.
Everything you did for your mother and your sister.
Yeah.
That's, wow. And you had to have a lot of determination, you know.
Yeah, well, you know, you're 16 years old.
Right. Right. Yeah, but that must have been hard, you know, the factory. And
Yes, but you know, you had to grow up fast.
right. Right. Wow. So.
Life made you grow up fast.
I know you said your sister didn't like to talk about it. Was your mother the same way? Did she? Is she also not the kind of person that wants to talk about the past? Was she?
No, my mother did
Yeah.
talk about it. Yes,
Mm-hmm.
yes. My mother was a tough lady.
Mm-hmm.
Was a very tough lady.
Did she motivate you?
Oh yes, absolutely.
A lot.
Yes.
Okay, so she was a kind of.
Yes, she gave me courage.
Right. Okay. And what about your father?
My father was not with us.
Right, your father was in another.
My father was in a labor service.
So how did?
We didn't know where he was, and he didn't know where we were.
So,
After the war, we
Right.
met up again.
and
He
how was
survived.
that? How did you meet up with him?
When we went back our town, after the war,
And he was there.
and he was there already.
Wow.
But my mother's family,
Uh-huh.
like 29 people, were wiped out in Auschwitz. They all killed in Auschwitz.
Wow.
My grandparents, uncles, aunts, cousins.
So, wow.
In our town of 10,000 Jews, maybe 200 survived.
Wow.
Maybe 300 survived.
Wow.
Not more than that. The rest all killed in Auschwitz.
And they said they moved you to the ghetto, and you were there for 4 to 5 weeks. You
Yes,
said?
that's it.
Right. And what happened to your town? They just moved your whole town into the ghetto? The town
Only
you were
the
living
Jews.
in?
Only the Jews.
Right. Okay.
Yeah.
Wow. And you said you were in the factory in the summer.
Yes.
And you were there for how long again?
From June 1944 till April
Wow.
1945.
And there was probably no heat in the camp, right? It was probably very cold there.
No, we had a wooden barrack,
Okay.
and in the middle of the wooden barrack there was a small pot belly cast iron stove,
Okay. And that was in the camp?
and that was in the in the
Okay.
barrack.
Okay. Wow. Okay. And how many people did you have a house that or an area that you all slept in at
Yes.
night in the factory?
Yes, in a barrack, in a wooden barrack.
Okay.
We slept in a wooden barrack, everybody.
Okay. Wow. And how many people was that?
We were about 28 people there.
28 people?
Yes.
Okay. All right. I think that's all the questions I have for now.
All right.
Thank you.
You're welcome.